Okay. All right.
On your camera.
I was gonna stand up there. Well, I don't know if it's. Hello, everybody. My name is Leah. Thank you so much for coming to our event. So just to get us started, we're gonna have an introductory, a few words from TELUS. Dilshan, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Leah. Afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be here representing TELUS today amongst esteemed colleagues in the engineering field and beyond. We've really enjoyed our partnership with the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers and Engineers Canada to be a part of the National Engineering Month this March. Thank you to Leah and the University of Ottawa for the opportunity to kick off this event. My name is Dilshan De Silva. I'm the Director of Platform Architecture, Analytics, Cloud Infrastructure, and Operations for Future-Friendly Technology Services at TELUS. Our team is responsible for leading the software architecture and the analytics for TELUS's TV platform, including supporting all of our TV and digital home initiatives deployed in the cloud. Diversity in the engineering field is an important topic and is certainly something that we place a ton of emphasis on at TELUS. We are 100% committed to ensuring our team is a true reflection of the Canadian society, and that every team member at TELUS is valued, that their contributions are recognized, and that they can really thrive in a safe and equitable environment. Within our various engineering groups, we see diversity as a key driver of the innovation for our business. A couple examples: when you have teams made up of different people from different backgrounds, they bring with them unique life experiences, cultural differences, and knowledge that can be used to solve problems in new and unexpected ways. We see this in action at TELUS all the time. Our teams are quite diverse, and they bring unique ideas and solutions to the table, and this leads to a much more innovative and user-friendly product at the end of the day. Secondly, real-world examples consistently show that diversity leads to better decision-making. Diverse teams consider a wider range of opinions, ideas, and even viewpoints, and this leads to more thorough discussions, better decision-making, and different ways of thinking, which again lead to a more innovative approach to delivering our various products and services. A key diversity-focused initiative unique to our future-friendly technology services team that I'm really proud to share is the formation of our own DE&I committee, known internally as our IDEA team, which stands for Inclusivity, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. Their mandate is to support TELUS, Canadian leader in developing a diverse team and an inclusive culture. The beauty of this initiative is that it really isn't top-down or a bunch of executives driving the vision, but rather grassroots-led. It has participation from members across of our team, and they work to shape our annual DE&I plan and develop and implement meaningful programs that both uplift our team members as well as the wider community outside of our org. As part of this program, a big priority right now is providing women in technology roles with significant career advancements and learning opportunities, and we've been making incredible progress in this regard. The talent pipeline for women in technology and engineering roles is an area where all of us across the industry have a lot of work to do, and so I'm proud our team is really rising up to that challenge. Finally, in this forum, speaking on behalf of the industry, I do feel that companies should have a deep sense of responsibility to ensure equality and representation at all levels. We need to lead the way to help break down stereotypes and barriers and inspire the next generation of engineers who come from diverse backgrounds to continue to pursue careers in engineering. I look forward to learning more today about the survey that Leah and her team are leading, and perhaps there will be some insights we can take away to help inform our own DE&I strategy at TELUS. So thank you for the opportunity to address you all. And back to you, Leah.
Thank you so much. First of all, can everybody see the slides? Because on my own computer, I'm not seeing the slides. So I just want to.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. That is a relief. We should just be able, we can all see it. We've had a bit of technical difficulties, but I think we'll do great. So thank you everybody for joining us to talk about belonging and the sense of belonging specifically within engineering students. I'm so sorry. We've had some. All right, there we go. Might be a little bit my computer. So basically the idea for the next hour is we'll talk a little bit. We had our lovely opening remarks. We'll talk about the background about diversity in engineering and diversity in general. And then we'll really get into the survey results and discussion. So I'm really excited about this. I'll be asking you some of the questions that we also asked in the survey. So if you have a piece of paper, that would be great. You can write down how you would respond. And compare it to how students at University of Ottawa responded. So that'll be the main thing, and then we'll have a couple concluding remarks. Before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Obviously, First Nations people have had a lot of barriers in the last century especially, and so we need to acknowledge that. So we're gonna do a little bit of a story time before we get into the survey results. My name's Leah. I did an undergrad in chemical engineering, which kind of taught me that just because you think like people who go into engineering and you're good at chemistry, that doesn't mean you should go into chemical engineering. So here we are. I did my master's in mechanical engineering, but focused on rebar. Corrosion in concrete, and now I'm actually studying civil engineering.
I'm just sorry to interrupt. The slides moving.
Sorry?
The slides aren't moving forward.
Oh, okay. That is excellent to know.
Maybe take it off the presentation.
Yeah, we're gonna try sharing it again. And hopefully, can you guys see a new slide now or?
Yes, but there's no slide. That's just on the title slide.
That is not ideal. All right. I thought that's what I was
We're
doing.
seeing like the main PowerPoint side.
Okay. This is what I get for doing a hybrid event. Advanced sharing options. It's not helping me at all.
If you hit escape, does it take you out of the presentation?
No, I can't even get out of Zoom.
Maybe if you can enable
so-
editing in your PowerPoint.
Sorry?
Enable editing in your PowerPoint.
Just to share it. Instead, screen.
Are you able to see this
Yep,
now?
we can see the
Okay.
slide.
All right. So we'll go back, hopefully. I'm so sorry. This is now frozen. Escape. Stop sharing. I really thought I was on top of this.
Can you move your cursor to the side?
Okay. Let's see if that will. Oh, all right. So you were able to see the slides and they're changing, right?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Sorry for all of this difficulty. Luckily, the discussion part is very flexible, so you won't miss out on anything. Yeah, so basically I've shown a little bit about kind of what my research is right now. I study concrete deterioration. So one of the big mechanisms that I wanted to share with you is how salt actually causes rebar corrosion in concrete, which then causes the concrete to crack off. So it falls off the structures. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is they didn't actually start using salt until the 1960s. Before that, people heated their homes with coal. They used the coal on the roads. And then hydroelectricity started, which is fantastic. It makes your house safer. It's all good stuff. But unfortunately, as we went forwards into the 80s, we started noticing all of this damage in our concrete infrastructure. So what I wanted to illustrate with this is just the amount of time it takes for different things to cause change, and kind of the unintended consequences that happen with everything whenever we change things. So my fellow host is Dr. Mavropoulos.
There's no video, right? So, okay, hi, I'm Catherine Mavropoulos. I'm professor of mechanical engineering. Glad to see some of my students here. I do computational simulations, sort of a marriage of mathematics, computer science, and mechanical engineering. I do for fluid dynamics, and a recent result from one of my students is here, the flow over a wing and a takeoff position on an aircraft, and there's some really interesting structures. I have a lot of fun doing a mix of disciplines, and that's not common in engineering. Usually we're so focused on one thing. I also like mechanical engineering because it's very broad, so many applications. I do other things in other fields like combustion, blood flow, etc. But I had for 10 years as chair for Women in Science and Engineering. You see the logo there. Sponsored by Pratt & Whitney Canada at first. So we did some work actually in industry with diversity in engineering teams in industry, which is quite interesting. And we also had a women's startup network. In the lower right, I have an example of a picture of a group of students who are from many different countries who worked on learning entrepreneurship skills and actually launching their own startups. They're with Vicky Saunders, you may recognize there in the middle, entrepreneur par excellence.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's obviously there's a lot of diversity in engineering and the women who are doing engineering. So I want to tell you guys a little bit more about myself. It's going to be a big story time about me for the next like 3 minutes. So another thing that I think is really important when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion is knowing what you don't know. In any field, that's important to know. It's kind of, you know, as you're going forwards. So myself, this is a little bit of my journey. But I grew up in a small town, and we would have people park their snowmobiles outside of the high school. We weren't that hick, but that was something that I was completely used to growing up. I'm told it's not that normal in cities, obviously. And I did a lot of sports. I worked at a historic site. I was good at science, like I said. But I was also not very integrated into my high school. I didn't feel like I belonged very much there. So much so that my sister and I actually did a bike trip to university when I started. So I was so anxious about making friends that we did a 3-day bike trip so that I would have a story so I could make friends when I started university. And we'll touch on things like that in a little bit later. So then I got to university. I did make friends, so luckily, and I had some really cool co-ops up north in the Yukon. I worked on water treatment. I did some coding. I did like CFD as an undergrad. And then I worked for the student newspaper as well. It wasn't paid, but you know. And then I had a rather big event in my life in that I got a really bad concussion. And that really shaped kind of my further decisions. I had a lot of spatial issues. I didn't feel safe driving. And so that kind of opened my eyes to some of the disability issues with engineering. It is very hard to have part-time jobs, for example. So then I, ended up in all this concrete stuff. And I still get to do a little bit of chemistry as part of kind of my civil engineering work. But as engineers, and of course for civil engineers and many other disciplines, you're not just working with engineers, you're not just working with numbers, you're working with communities in public spaces. You want to make sure that you're building so that people who need to use it can use it. So I was wondering, I thought we could take this moment and people could share some experience that maybe shaped their who they are today as an engineer and as a person. I really hope this works because yeah, so if you want to just turn on if anybody has anything they'd like to share. What time is it now? Okay, we've resolved the slide issue. Does anybody in this room have anything they want to share? Olazola?
Yeah, for example, for me,
perfect.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
When I had my, when I was pregnant, I was the first woman in the first pregnancy for my manager, and he didn't know how to do the maternity leave. So that was very interesting, being the only very few women in engineering in the work environment. So it
Absolutely.
was a funny event, him trying to figure out how to do the human resources paperwork.
I had the same experience in the US, but there was no human resources and no paperwork and no help. Had to find somebody to replace me, and then I owed them a favor. It was not fun.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so I mean, things like different stages of our lives, we have different influences. And I think when we talk about EDI, and when we talk to students about how we're going to go forward and be engineers, it's, as you know, the student when I was in high school with our snowmobiles and stuff, I was not thinking about having children or, you know, having a concussion and having all of these issues. So I think that's very important. And I think that knowing what you don't know and trying to understand more about the world around you is very important for equity, diversity, and inclusion as we move forward.
Any other examples in the room? or-
I did a lot of robotics in high school. I went to an all-female school from grade 7 to 12,
Oh, cool.
and I kind of led the robotics team in my later years. But we ended up making it to a provincial competition where we were the only all-female team, and we were shunned by the other
Really?
teams,
Oh.
where it was kind of implied that the reason we were there is because we were an all-female team and they wanted representation, which was difficult. And it kind of got me thinking about, you know, like, why am I actually here? And the fact that I did deserve to be there, even if other people didn't necessarily think that. And it was one of those things that just kind of made me think, no, I'm here and I'm here for a reason.
Yeah, good.
Right.
Awesome. Yes, these are all good experiences. Hopefully, whoever's at the door comes in. So should we continue, do you think? Or... Okay, we will continue. We want to get to the results. So the other thing I wanted to emphasize, just like my bridge, is the change over time. So my grandfather, he was born in the Czech Republic. His family was the first one in his village to have a radio. So there he is, very cute on the newspaper with their radio. But of course, he was born in 1925. World War II happened, and then everything was pretty bad. He actually ran across the border into American occupied Germany. And eventually he ended up in Canada, where he married my grandmother. And so he's probably one of the reasons that I've ended up doing engineering, because he was really cool. But I think there's a lot to be said about just so much of our population comes to Canada because of conflicts in their home country. They don't necessarily want to come and assimilate to Canada. Many people hope to go home. And for him, with the language barrier as well, he was so lucky he met my grandma. They loved each other, but also he wrote his 4th year thesis with her help, because English was not well and they were typing. So it was really helpful for him as he made his way towards, you know, his future endeavors. Yeah, so I just wanted to also mention that, because we see in a lot of our communities in Canada, you can have very insular experiences while being in the diversity of Canada. And then I also want to touch on what is equality versus equity. So basically, it's the idea that giving everybody the same resources will result in some people struggling more because they have less, because they're coming from a place of having less resources. So in the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. So they're being treated equally, but obviously it's causing issues for this littlest person here. In the second, they've kind of given them equal access to the game, which is equitable treatment. But then in the third image, they just took down the wall. And so everybody can see the game because the systemic barriers have been removed. And I think the systemic barriers are very much still in place. And again, it's a bit of a generational problem. It's also a very good illustration of capitalism, I think, but maybe I don't understand capitalism. Hard to know. So on that note, I did find that there's a lot of really interesting dates that have happened in Canada that are much more recent than I realized. So the final residential school closed only in 1996. I definitely growing up knew people who had relatives who had lived in residential schools, and that was very damaging for their whole family. The final segregated school, so based on racial lines, that closed. That was in Halifax in 1983. The Canadian Human Rights Act was 1977. In Ontario, the final segregated school closed in 1965. And then the first female engineer in Canada graduated in 1927. So it's a good reminder again that people are underrepresented because of systemic barriers and not a lack of capacity in the field. Because you do see people say, well, I don't see any women in engineering, therefore they shouldn't be in engineering. Like that is why they shouldn't be in engineering. And I mean, that's not really necessarily the case. And one of the big barriers to enrolling in engineering in undergrad is taking physics in high school. You can see a big drop off. So it has very masculine stereotype for some reason. Women don't end up taking physics, and then of course they can't apply to engineering without maybe staying an extra year, things like that. And a lot of work has been done to increase opportunities for girls in STEM. So people are really focusing on this high school section of the problem, which is fantastic. So I wanted to also highlight this time frame. A lot of engineering buildings built in the 60s and 70s didn't have toilets for women. And so there's been some very inventive retrofits. Have you experienced any interesting toilet retrofits
Oh,
so
yeah.
that women could experience it?
When I was in graduate school, there was no retrofit. You just had to run around to other floors to find a bathroom.
Okay, so there you are. One of the buildings that I was in a lot in undergrad, also they would switch it based on the percentage of women in the classes in the building to either have a washroom on the third, and the first and third floor would be the same gender and the second floor would be a different gender. So they decided if you needed 4 stalls for one gender or 2. So you can see here also that engineering is much lower than a lot of other fields. And so that's a question, why aren't there more women in engineering? Does it have to do with the industrial work department or environments, the lack of part-time roles? I really feel like part-time roles at an entry level is a big barrier for some people if you have care responsibilities and things like that. And again, we were all astonished about Hidden Figures, and yet, you know, several decades later in Canada, women still didn't have washrooms in the buildings they were studying in. And obviously, if you get there and there's no washroom, I mean, you're not gonna feel very included, are you? And actually, it continues to be an issue, for example, for women in construction today. So, all right. So this is the exciting part. Not that the other part wasn't exciting. So first of all, why do a survey? Well, there was a lot of stuff that happened between, for example, me graduating and doing the survey. Because I graduated undergrad in 2016. The Me Too movement happened in 2017, which had a big impact on mentorship because people were worried about being convicted of, you know, being improper with students, with coworkers, and some people protected themselves by just excluding women. And then of course, pandemic learning would have a big impact as well. I thought it could be beneficial if you couldn't tell what gender people were, but I understand that it wasn't necessarily. And so the question was, are there still issues? Have things gotten better? Or are there just many isolated incidents that maybe we're still picking up on? And, you know, like I feel old. I know I'm not that old, but especially for the undergrads, when I went in to try to get them to do the survey, this is me. So, whoops. is anybody familiar with the picture of the plane? Okay, we have 2 people in the room. Is there anybody online who would like to describe it? This isn't helping me. Okay, we'll get somebody in the room. We'll get you.
It's almost like survivorship bias, where from I think World War II, planes were coming in, and they were trying to find out what parts of the plane you should reinforce. So then they mapped out the bullet holes that have occurred on the plane, and one person proposed, okay, we should put more reinforcement where the bullets have landed, right? But then another guy was like, well, that doesn't make sense because these planes returned to us. So the planes that got hit in the other places, white spaces, weren't able to return. And that's why, like, those are the parts that should be reinforced, the engine, the propeller, the body.
Exactly. Yeah. So she explained it really well. I'm not sure if you guys heard it online. Please comment if you didn't hear it. And if there's just a bunch of comments, then I will re-explain it. But yeah, so I've kind of used that idea for my survey, is basically that the people who are studying engineering now are the ones who have made it. The ones who are master's students obviously completed undergrad. So these are the people who feel a strong enough sense of belonging to stay, or spite. I mean, it's hard to tell sometimes. You can tell I'm in my 4th year of grad studies. So yeah, so Abram Wald was the person who said, we need to look at the spots that didn't have bullet holes. Yeah, so why do we care? A lot of people say, well, sexism isn't so bad here. We have a lot of international students from like Afghanistan who say, you know, when I compare, it's great here. Everything is fantastic in Canada. And likewise for things like racism. But unfortunately, people do still experience issues related to these problems. And then other questions, I wanted to know if there's a strong influence from our families to study engineering, and also if there are some disciplines that are less welcoming. Anecdotally, I had observed that some programs with the influence of industry through co-op actually became less welcoming and very like more set in certain ways of thinking as you progress through your undergrad education. All right, so now the exciting part. We're at 12:30, okay. So who did the survey? I went around, the people in the room are raising their hands. Thank you, everybody. So I initially sent it out to student groups and was like, please do the survey. A lot of them thought I was spam, which I mean, fair. So that's why I have in the summer, I surveyed a lot of people, but I actually redid my ethics approval process and went into classrooms to do the survey in the fall and the early winter. So you can see here, I think it's really interesting that the undergrad students have a completely different background from like a cultural perspective than grad students. So I think really it's very different groups, especially when you consider the support that you have coming into undergrad compared to the support that you have coming into grad school to integrate into the environment. And of course, like you always, when you have a lot going on, you want to find a group that makes you feel comfortable. So we do get some groups that kind of are very close with people from their home countries, which makes absolute sense. So I also asked about high school because I had some questions about physics. I wanted to compare to the percentages of women in physics from 2016. And we can see that the majority of graduate students did not do their high school in Ontario. Of course, this university, we have a big impact. We have a lot of people from Quebec as well. And then we also can see that slightly less of the women who are doing engineering did their high school in Ontario as well. It seemed, which I was a little bit surprised about. I wasn't expecting that. All right. So does anybody have any thoughts about this, this graphic here? So this is essentially the responses when we asked, do you think there are more challenges for engineers who are visible minority, are women, or are part of the LGBTQ+ community? Feel free to unmute yourself. Anybody in this room have comments, thoughts? Dr. Mavropoulos? Yeah, so female answers are consistently higher. This was kind of the premise of my survey, is that there are experiences that people are having, and we recognize them as being negative, because obviously it's not really acceptable to be sexist. But many people come from a background where they do have very strong gender roles, and women don't fit into being within this technical environment. And so you can have these kind of backward compliments that seem positive but are kind of negative. And if you've never had that kind of comment that continues on, then you just walk past it. Like, you're like, oh, he said this nice compliment to her, and the woman might go away with a very negative feeling from a conversation, while a man might continue with his day with no impact at all. And these are the types of things, and this can be very cultural and just misunderstandings. But it could also be with malicious intent, and we don't necessarily know. So the other thing that I was really interesting was that the percentage of people who said yes for added challenges for members of the LGBTQ plus community, it was lower for all the groups, and I was very surprised. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? We have-
I am a member of it.
Okay.
So I can say that, to be honest, it is actually quite difficult. I think the main issue is that they don't realize that there are challenges, and that people are quite homophobic, especially in engineering. I've met quite people who are very homophobic, haven't wanted to work with me, made it clear they don't want to sit near me, and it's something that you don't talk about. I don't want people to know that that's happening. I don't want people to, and I'm sure, like, I've met so many people who are very helpful and supporting, but it's, you don't want, there's one, like, I was in chemical engineering, and it's around a class of 80 kids at my university, and everyone knows everyone. So to single and say, hey, this person has been homophobic to me, you have their friends, people, everyone is friends in this class. So it's not something you can really speak out about. But it is definitely difficult. I would say yes, it is definitely, there are more challenges. It is much harder to have just genuine interaction with people. I think there are quite a few set internalized prejudices that aren't realized.
Wow. Yeah, I agree. That's why I put this as a question. It's actually hard hearing you say that. I'm really sorry that's your experience. Yeah, so we do have an issue. So that's definitely one aspect. Are there any other? We have another thought in the room. I'm not sure how well it's getting picked up because you were supposed to use that, but
I think one of the big problems with it is that people sometimes forget about them because they're not visible.
That's a
It's
good
not
point.
Visible minority versus women or other visible minorities. So people forget, and maybe that's why the stats are a little bit lower.
that definitely could be a part of it as well. And the other thing, I was chatting with some people, and I started getting this result, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. I'm very confused. Like, there's all these women who say yes to everything and then no to being part of the LGBTQ community. And one person said, oh, can we let them?
Admittance.
You're seeing my struggles. But there was a student from a Middle Eastern country, and she said, I didn't know what being gay meant until I got to Canada. And I was just, I thought everybody knew what being gay meant and what LGBTQ plus meant. And I did only put the acronym because I just didn't expect people to not know that. But she said, until I came to Canada and people told me about it, I didn't know. And so that goes back to it's important to know what you don't know. And like, even me had no idea. I did know that there's a lot of issues in some communities. I think it's 69 countries right now where it's illegal to be gay. So when you look, especially at international students, but also people in our communities who have grown up in Canada, there are still issues for this group. Yes.
I'm from the Middle East, Lebanon, and it's not like it's not there. It's more like people don't notice it. It's not apparent, and the parents or the wider kind of like the community will make it kind of know, like, okay, this is bad, like in their sense.
Right.
Like that's how they phrase it, right? But they don't really tell us kind of what it actually is. it's almost like a big umbrella term. So, you know, we call something people, we call something other phrase. I had this experience going to a store, and there was like this rainbow like keychain, and you think nothing of it until your parents say like, oh no, you shouldn't wear this on your bag, whatever, which is very weird. But yeah, just it's there. Like there are nightclubs and stuff like that that have like that presence,
Right.
which is not apparent. So I was a kid, not a kid, I'm still a kid, but like I get like their perspective on it because they treat it as something outside of like your own individual being. And even for work, I wouldn't really necessarily think that your sexual preference would have anything of effect on it, right? But I just never had that experience.
Yeah.
If you're straight, you kind of like, it's just the norm.
And this is exactly it, is we're just not aware of these issues, but the people who have an issue will often make it apparent just to you, and other people, you will think that they've made it apparent in a public setting, but often they have chosen their moment. So they have only communicated to you. And this is one of the biggest issues with creating an equitable, diverse, inclusive community and environment. Yeah, so I thought these were probably, if I were to pick one set of findings from the survey, I think the results from these 3 questions were one of the biggest. So we're going to just look at responses between undergrad and Eng students, which are course-based students, and then thesis-based graduate students. So we did have responses from like 2nd and 3rd year students. That's why these results maybe don't intuitively seem exactly the same. So for graduate students, I also asked about graduate students with families, because like in my own lab work, the 2 of the men in my group have had kids, their wives have had kids, and we're like, well, I'm not gonna have kids while I'm doing my degree. So it's definitely, it's almost a different decision for them versus us. I don't really have any extra thoughts about this, so we'll keep going. Yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that we still have this higher percentage of women here. And then students who are here for a shorter period of time might be more likely to come from an international setting, did find this lower. Okay, so I think this one is kind of fun. And change the mood a little bit. Yeah, so does anybody have any thoughts about this figure? So this is showing students from different programs and who they remembered as knowing who was an engineer in their pre-university days. Okay, so I think the interesting thing, so this is biomedical engineering and mechanical engineering. You can see they're about 10% higher than the other engineerings for didn't know any engineers. How I keep describing it is that they kind of YOLO'd their way in. So I find that super interesting, and this wasn't something that I'd really been expecting to see necessarily. But they actually, like when you really think about engineering, when you think about like NASA and different aspects of engineering, like when you see it, like Bill Nye the Science Guy was a mechanical engineer, and in media, you see a lot of mechanical engineering, you see planes, you see trains, and that seems to have influenced a lot of mechanical engineers to go into engineering. We don't see as many civil engineers YOLOing their way in. So that's unfortunate. I guess it's not as
Well, I
exciting.
feel like civil engineers are, whenever you see a picture of an engineer or some guy with a hard hat, you know,
Yeah.
and in a construction environment, which is not necessarily what engineers do in general, but everybody knows that, like dams and bridges, right? That's all they
Yeah,
say. So I
absolutely.
think people have a better idea what a civil engineer is, but they don't have an idea what, certainly not what a chemical engineer is.
And I believe a lot of people go into chemical engineering because they're good at chemistry, which, as I said, is unfortunately not great, not a good motivation. So we have a question here: what would biotechnology be? So at University of Ottawa, this falls under chemical engineering, but with more of a focus on biological processes. We have a medical school, so I think there's a lot of interplay between those
think it's more with health sciences.
Oh, it's with health sciences then, yeah. So they're
Anybody in
more,
that program? Oh,
it's the great switch. Okay. Yeah, so these are some of the influences, and now I also have it by gender. Like I said earlier, I was really influenced by my grandfather, who would be the extended family, and then coaches, all of which were mechanical engineers. Uh-oh. No,
But the father on the mechanical, oh, it's biomedical. Still pretty high.
this one here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the parent influence will be shown to be more interesting in this figure here. So we have our undergrad men, undergrad women, graduate, sorry, men, and then women in grad school. So we can see as we go towards grad school, we're less likely to have not known engineers before engineering, much more likely to have an extended family member who is an engineer, or even a family friend. And I think this is really interesting. There's slightly more women whose father was an engineer who've chosen to go into engineering at the undergraduate level. And I feel like that's a lot of parents who maybe recognize traits in their kids and say, well, I enjoy being an engineer. Why don't you try it? Because we think in a similar way. Does anybody have thoughts about this one? This figure?
I think after the presentation, we discussed this, but as you can see for women in the undergrad level, for father and mother, it's also a little higher as well, versus for every other category, it's lower. And usually, at least what we kind of theorized, is that women feel more comfortable going into engineering when they have a support system that they feel can help them, versus men will kind of feel more comfortable if they're just influenced by people in their surroundings.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
What's scary is that teacher one,
Yeah.
the woman teacher. It's like so low.
So anecdotally, I have definitely heard stories where at the high school level, teachers have said, women are not good at math, women are not good at science, therefore X, Y, Z.
Yeah, we have stories like that.
There are many, many
Decades.
stories. This, unfortunately, the way I phrased the question was asking if they knew people who were engineers. So in theory, the teacher would have to be an engineer. So it was not if I were to do the survey again, I would change this question or have an additional question. But I already had like an 8 to 10 minute survey, and I appreciate everybody doing the survey, and I didn't want to make it take too long. Yeah, so we'll just continue on. Okay, so this is paper or other tab on your computer time. So what percent of the following programs do you think are women? So I'm going to compare it to the Canadian average from Engineers Canada. So for civil engineering, do we have any ideas? Okay, go ahead.
Can I try all?
Sure,
Okay.
let's hear.
I think civil is more male dominated, probably like 70-30. Mech is very male dominated, 80-20. Chem seems to be pretty balanced. I think it's like 50-50. And electrical, heavily male, 80-20.
Okay, so we've got civil 30, mechanical is 20, chem 50, and then electrical is again 20%, right? Everybody store away your theories.
Comment.
Yeah.
Think your ranking might be correct, but I personally think in education that might be accurate, but once you get into industry, it does get a lot lower. So I would say I agree with your rankings, but I would place the percentages lower for women in each of these fields, because you do start to see change happening at the education levels, but that change is a lot longer to trickle into industry.
Yeah. Okay, so we will the great reveal. So this is by program. We can see, so for mechanical engineering, it's about 16% women. Another thing I would redo is how I selected the percentages, because I did it kind of by buckets, which was not ideal in the end. But you can see at least most students kind of got this. Most students got the 50%. Again, here, pretty close. A lot of people think it's lower though. And here as well, you have a lot of people in here, which I mean, to be fair, 29 versus 25, I can see how they ended up here. And again, a lot of people think it's much lower in civil engineering as well. So if you, let's say you have a family friend, say my daughter wants to do engineering, do you think electrical will be good for her? If your perception is that there's like 5% women in electrical engineering, you might say no. I mean, I don't think it is. Conversely, if you think that there's 50% women in electrical engineering, that may not be beneficial either, because you get there and you're not prepared for that environment. So just those are the programs. So once you look at it by gender of the respondents, you can see once again, slight differences. And I think for like chemical engineering, for example, women tended to overestimate, whereas for the other programs, men were more overestimating down here, and it was more equal in here. So, thank you, Antoine. Yeah, so those are just some of the trends. And I think it's very interesting. Like, for example, when I started in undergrad, I met 8 electrical engineering women. And I was like, wow, electrical is where all the women are. But it was all 8 out of the class of 120. So the way we perceive it, it's not common. People don't just necessarily know these statistics and these numbers. We're very much in our heads doing our own thing. Okay, so for group projects, maybe just write down, keep in mind which ones, and then you can figure it out in the next one. So I'll just give you guys a couple moments. All right, so we're gonna go take a look at the results. So looking at undergrad versus graduate, for people who said they were a project leader, it's about equal for everyone, so 50%. I perform technical tasks. Most people feel like they do it on the whole, except for women in graduate studies. Obviously, this is concerning. I take part in report writing. This one, we have a big difference, and it becomes more pronounced on the next slide, which you will see. And then I help organize meetings and plan to meet deadlines. A lot of women are doing that at the undergrad level. Although in grad school, it becomes more equal. I personally am not good at organizing and plan. I do meet deadlines, but I think the chaos of this presentation and the technical issues that could have been prevented if I was here earlier are a bit of an example. I find it very stressful at the very least. And then as far as analyzing results at the undergrad level is very similar, but in grad school, you start seeing a diversion as well. Of course, between thesis-based and course-based, that could be where some of the differences are. And finally, I help troubleshoot problems. Men are more likely to feel like they troubleshoot problems at the undergrad level. Does anybody have thoughts about this? Okay, we shall continue. So then you look at the first year students versus the fourth year students. So for the first year students, this is only showing the ones that I got from the fall. So they're, kind of a little bit fresh out of high school. So there is going to have a big influence from their high school experiences, whereas the fourth year students obviously have learned a lot at university, which is obviously very important. But unfortunately, we do see that the women, it was very equal when they came in as far as technical tasks. By fourth year, less of the women felt like they were doing technical tasks and more of the men, which is an issue. And then as far as report writing, I'm excited to say that men do more report writing, but the amount of women doing report writing still increased. And then as far as helping organize meetings and plan deadlines, this was still very high. And you do talk about when you say like a parent, the mother in the home for a long time, there has been a disparity in housework and keeping track and organizing, and it's very much a female stereotypical property. So we're seeing this in our classrooms as well. Helping analyze results. We can see again, this has improved and it becomes more equal, which is fantastic. And then troubleshooting problems, we are seeing the women more involved in that. but not doing your technical, like learning the technical tasks, doing hands-on technical tasks. When we're in the school environment where we're learning, it's really all about developing skills that we can then show in our workplace. So I know we're getting close. So we do have a comment saying how it's interesting how the women are doing the administrative tasks, so the report writing. And I did include this question because it is something that we do see anecdotally a lot. So I thought it would be important to put some questions in where we can kind of quantify this experience. So I had an earlier question that was asking just like to rank different types of school learning activities. So like one of them was technical writing. One of them was like, you know, individual problem solving, like coding. So there were 5 things and they ranked it. And the only one, everything was kind of like, everybody was very medium about it, except for communication and technical writing, which almost everybody hated. So I just want to say, I don't think the women enjoy or prefer writing the reports. They just feel like it needs to get done, I think, is part of it. And maybe they've been pushed out of the technical tasks and this is what's been assigned to them. We all know that group projects is very challenging, even though that is kind of what a lot of jobs involve. So it's important to really have good structure to how we are approaching these things. Oh no.
Get rid of your this.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see if it will go. So I asked a lot more questions, but I think we're getting near the end of our time. So I have timed this well. But engineering students could agree on a couple things, which was great. So their family and friends, they felt they supported them in studying engineering. Over 82% of the responses said agree or strongly agree. And they see themselves working in a job related to their educational field. Over 78% of respondents across undergrad and grad did say they agreed or strongly agreed to this. So that was great. We did have other questions where people were not as strongly one way or the other, which I will be diving into later, not in this presentation, unfortunately. And we're on to the concluding remarks. So I think if you take away anything from the presentation, I would love for you to start thinking about knowing what you don't know, and kind of in doing some reading. It's not always fair to ask people from diverse groups to explain their culture to you. And so it's important to take that time and learn. So if you have a lot of students from India, it might be good to, it would be good to learn about the cultural practices in that area. So there's less misunderstandings, especially, you know, if you're managing people. And we obviously still have very gendered differences in how we're experiencing our education. So obviously women still feel like there are issues and men are less aware that there maybe are issues. And group projects, obviously we do have some gendered roles in what we are doing in these group projects. And finally, representation matters. So it's important to see positive role models. And it is my personal opinion that everyone benefits from learning about contributions from diverse people in engineering. So we want to hear about, you know, the woman who did the cool thing, like writing code to get us to the moon, because it's a very positive way to expand. And so that's all the slides I have for you. We're going to go through the sponsor slides. So we have a comment here that says that communicating, so I'm just going to go through communicating the results of engineering work by means of engineering reports, presentations, etc., is actually as important, if not more important. Absolutely. So feel free to unmute yourselves if you have comments online. We're just going to go through these are the contributors to National Engineering Month. And that is everything. Yeah, so that is the survey. I will be coming up with more information to share, hopefully. Does anybody have thoughts?
providing space to have constructive discussions.
You are welcome. I'm hoping that, I feel like this is a good way to start trying to better understand the problems without, making people defensive. Because it's nobody's fault that there's problems, but if we are more aware of it, we can kind of put more changes in. Yeah.
Does anybody have ideas for what we should do next in the faculty, given these results?
I'm going to speak up here. I've been kind of quiet because I wanted to hear what the younger engineers had to say. I graduated from engineering the first time in 1980. So it's interesting to see how things have changed, but also how things have stayed the same. And I think this kind of survey would really benefit from reaching out to the wider community of practicing engineers. And I think there are organizations around that would definitely support that and like to be involved. So yeah, reach out to me. Leah knows how to contact me through Twitter at least. So reach out to me if you want to talk about it more, because this is important. I think when you're young, you see biases more on an individual to individual basis. And as you get older, you realize how much how strong the unconscious biases are, how large the hurdles are, and how much they represent society values more than individual values. So that's it for now.
Thank you. Leah is not sure who you are, so maybe you could
think
just
I
send her a direct message
Oh, yeah.
if you want to
Leah,
be private in the chat.
Leah, we've corresponded on Twitter. So
I do know how to use them. I think.
yeah.
Thank you for the comments.
Yeah. Fantastic. Very helpful. Yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody? I mean, I've already interviewed a bunch of you about what should change around here.
I think similarly to having more representation for women in STEM, I think would also be great to kind of push forward the queer community in STEM as well. And like you said, that it just isn't something that is necessarily on the forefront of people's minds. Maybe having more representation and people seeing it more might get them to start connecting those those brain cells, right?
Absolutely.
I would actually back on that. I think this is a very interesting presentation. It talks about what people think and the amount of people that think that way. It doesn't really talk about why they think that way. So, I talked about my experiences. I don't think many people understand that those experiences actually happen. So you have those percentages of people say, mainly people are saying, no, I don't think that people have issues
Yeah.
in engineering. And this presentation states that. It doesn't state why they're wrong. And I would think that they're wrong in this situation. I'm sure that a lot of people would also agree with that with me. Because if you've actually seen and been in that experience, then you know that's different. And I'm sure that every single thing that you have there, people would agree that it is an issue. It is more difficult for people. So knowing why people think that way and how to get around getting them to understand why it is an issue, why it should be talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think we need to have some kind of anonymous system for people to say stuff they've experienced?
Maybe. I mean, it was a big issue for me in my class where I knew these people and I knew people were friends with these people, and it was, how do you go around making that? You make it an issue when you talk about it, and you blacklist yourself. All these people who liked you, but they also like instead of now they're stuck in between something. You make it a problem, and when it's one or two or three people, it's just not worth it. But it's still something that I have to carry and deal with for no particular reason. It's not fair.
Mm-hmm. Do you think like we need a suggestion box? I mean, that's the old style, but a system where people
I don't know why. The thing is, I don't know how you do it.
Mhm.
So I think that's why I think.
But at least if like hearing your experience, then people would start to believe it more, right? Than just brushing it off.
I think if there is more outward talk about it, and making it easier to talk about that. For sure.
But we don't want to burden other people who are having problems. Can you come and talk about this to everybody? It's like, maybe you don't want to do that.
I think it is just a responsibility from the minority group to advocate for themselves, like onto the faculty and some of the staff. So when you need to prioritize classroom time for learning, you can also prioritize it for some of these discussions, like maybe at the beginning of the semester, 10 minutes of a class can be presenting
the results of this survey or a diversity training on how to be sensitive and what kind of issues exist, even if it's just like example situations. It doesn't have to be for personal experience, but you know, this comment was made, how would you handle it, having like maybe the first 5 minutes of the class centered around these discussions? And I know time is tight and we do have lots of material to get through, but rather than putting it on the responsibility of the minority community to actually do it themselves, take some authority and responsibility for that as well.
So I'm just getting around and we've reached the end of our time. So for the online people, we're gonna head out and close it. So I'm just gonna leave my. Yeah, so we'll do the in-class. They wanted to close the online version. So thank you so much everybody for coming. I'm just gonna send out my email quickly and then maybe leave it up for a minute or two and then head out. So yeah. So we'll just continue it in the room here. But thank you everybody who was able to make it. Yeah.